thank you again, Trevor, for taking time out of your day, man. I really appreciate this.
You bet. No problem. My pleasure, Eric.
You've been named the sports world's best brain trainer by Sports Illustrated, with some of the world's most elite performers from Major League Baseball, the NFL, the UFC. Such a great accomplishment. And just looking over your website, would love to go back a little bit. Your dad, Bob, was a world-renowned peak performance, educator, contributor to Chicken Soup for the Soul, president of National Association of Self-Esteem. What things did he teach you as a kid that kind of pushed you to be in the career path that you're on right now?
Well, Eric, that's a great question. And it's fascinating because my sort of introduction to UFC was probably a couple of years ago before WME ended up purchasing them. I worked for IMG for many years, and I was the director of performance at our sports academy in Bradenton.
Gotcha.
And Bradenton, the IMG Academy is kind of like Hogwarts for athletes. Okay. Sort of 600 acres and sort of a very unique environment. But I get asked that question a lot. The peak performance industry, the business psychology, it remains a small industry. I would say it's probably matured. It's most in the business world where you have brand names like Tony Robbins, and then obviously you have these thought leaders now like a Grant Cardone or Gary Vaynerchuk, and then you have obviously staples like Norman Vincent Peale, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, but in sports we don't have that. So there is not an industry for sports psychology in sports. And I think because, a lot of that is because there's an infinite supply of talent, that developing talent's really not the responsibility of an organization. And that sounds crazy, but I think you would understand that. But I think what I learned from my father, I'm often asked, would he be proud of you? And he passed away 12 years ago. Yeah. And I think what he'd be most proud of is, whether I was a fireman, teacher, athlete, MMA fighter, doctor, janitor, probably what matters most is that when life challenged me, I could live the things that he taught.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most important thing to him. The last couple of years, I've had some really amazing things, but I've also probably in the last 2 years, even today, been challenged more where life says, what do you got, bro? And, right. And I think I've been uniquely equipped to handle it. I think a lot of time when I was growing up, I felt like Daniel LaRusso, where I'm like, why am I painting the fence? And yeah. Why am I waxing the car? And then when these moments sort of happen, you're like, wow, I can block and I can do all these different things. So, yeah. But look, the exposure at 4 years old, I started with targeted affirmations. They played, Norman Vincent Peale and Brian Tracy and Earl Nightingale wow. by my bedside every night I went to bed. They played cybernetic waves that had subliminal messaging, as I went to bed, and all of my affirmations were neutral. I was never raised in this the positive environment, but everything was sort of a behavior. I take setbacks as temporary. I bounce back quickly. I have an elite work ethic, like just things that were in my control. They really weren't aspirational, but they were things that could be done. And so, I was sort of raised with an interesting marketing campaign. And then, we weren't allowed to watch the news in my house or listen to country music. My dad really believed in the minimization of negativity. So it was kind of a fascinating way to grow up. And, I'd never really interned with my dad or did anything. I mean, I was a big fan of him and I went to a lot of his events, but, I graduated from Occidental College, went to grad school, tried my hand at pro soccer, and then found myself teaching in LA Unified School District and coaching. Okay. And, from there sort of navigated from education into, starting working at IMG Academy in Bradenton. And instead of teaching social sciences, I was teaching sports psychology to kind of a wide range of some of the best athletes in the world to, a spoiled high school kid from Venezuela.
Sure.
That parents just wanted him out of the house. So I really didn't differentiate one versus the other. The kid from Venezuela was going to get my best. And if it was, Tony Romo or Byron Leftwich or at Alabama, getting to meet guys like Deontay Wilder and other different types of, I mean, whoever you were coming across or interacting, you were going to bring your best. And if I had to pick up Cam Newton at the airport and take him to Walmart, and that was where our meeting was going to happen, that was where it happened. And
wow.
And I learned how to function in a really non-traditional way. And, sometimes people would come meet in an office, but normally it was meet them where they are and then develop an educational platform that was going to be easy to understand. And we realized early on, Eric, that the positive thinking was a concept that was really hard for people to grasp.
Yeah.
Meditation and mindfulness were processes that were really difficult. So we started focusing on more controllable things like language. And we knew we struggled to prove the power of positivity, but we could prove the impact of negativity is not being a good thing. And particularly as you start to verbalize negativity, it's 10 times more powerful than when you think about it. And if it's negative, it's a multiple of 4 to 7 times on top of that.
Wow.
So what we started to realize was, verbalizing negativity is almost 40 to 70 times more powerful than just not saying anything at all. And we just kind of built a platform, first off, not saying stupid shit out loud, and then without teaching any alternative. And where I think people get really frustrated is if, okay, you're trying to teach a young Eric Anders while he's an Alabama football player, be positive, go there and meditate. I mean, that's hard. But if you say, look, let's just not talk about the heat. Let's not talk about your frustration with the coach. Let's not talk about the situation where we're at in the third quarter against Auburn. And then we developed this middle ground called neutral. Let's focus on the behavior, not the emotion. And
right.
I think there's probably a handful of us that have found a way to build some relevance in UFC and in football and baseball and basketball, but I don't know, Eric, that I'd go back and tell my 25-year-old self to get into this industry because there's not a lot of opportunity, but I am grateful to be on your show today and just to give people a little bit of insight into neutral thinking and maybe learning how to minimize the negative more than this pressure to be positive.
Right. Yeah. One of the things you mentioned on your website there too is there's a big confusion between sports psychology and mental conditioning or mindset. For those who don't understand, what's the difference between those two?
Well, I think the difference is sort of just like the variation that I think we see in physical training. Right. Like I'm not going to an Olympic lifting coach to get faster, so Olympic lifts are bigger, faster, stronger, grip it and rip it. But a speed coach might be more of a functional trainer. It might focus more on dorsiflexion, dynamic movement, things along those lines. And then, someone who's going to focus on the 100, 200, 400 is going to be different than someone's going to focus on the 800, 1600 or 5,000 meters.
Right.
And I think really the architecture in psychology has the same variance, even though the consumer is really confused. So you have, clinical mental health counseling, clinical psychology, for medical related issues. And then you have sort of kind of sports psychology, sports psychiatry, which is assessment, like I'm assessing people and I'm giving organizations or sports teams profiles based upon what you may or may not do based upon how you answer a set of open-ended or fixed questions. And then you have sort of this mindset area, which is about, how you think, how you talk, your language. And it's probably less about problem-based and really more, how do you make great people greater, good people better? And so I've worked in multidisciplinary environments where I've worked with all sorts of different specialists in the same way a speed coach might be with an Olympic lifting coach who might be with a functional trainer, that way. Unfortunately, I think the consumer is so confused. We think of sports psychology as, okay, there's this left-handed pitcher that's throwing it 80 rows up, go see that guy or that lady. And at the places I've been, fortunately, the opportunity to work for Coach Saban at Alabama, Coach Fisher at Florida State, and now Coach Smart at Georgia, my responsibility has always been developing an educational platform for all of our players and our coaches that's, based on simplicity that can make everybody better, even though they might have more specialized issues that they may need to deal with, that they would go see somebody else for. And so, and then really over the years, truthfully, I've been as much of an advisor because I was a director of performance. I kind of know how all the elements fit in, and as well as, helping our coaches prepare for their pregame speeches, their press conferences, what movies we're going to watch before a game, what music we're going to listen to, kind of a jack of all trades, Eric. And what was, of the 132 Division I college programs, though, you still only have 5 programs actively doing these types of things. So it's not an industry that that's going to grow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, having worked with all of these professional sports players, what makes the difference between a good athlete and a great athlete?
Well, I think that's an interesting question because, I mean, I think, some of athleticism is, obviously a set of gifts. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think a good athlete or a great athlete, athletically, a lot of it's going to be genetic, and then it's going to be connected to how they train. I think if the question is a good performer versus a great performer,
right.
I would say that sort of lives in the aggregate of marginal gains. And when we aggregate marginal gains, like how do you make micro percentage improvements across multiple levels? So your fatigue science, how are we maximizing sleep? I think fueling is a big issue now. What do I eat? When do I eat? And what's the dose of the type of food I'm eating? Is it micro meals? Is it things along those lines? And then I think physiologically, recovery versus training versus all the different elements. And then I think psychologically, how is my language, and then my ability to see things in advance of it, and the ability to image and to visualize. How is the minimization of negativity, the application of neutral? But I think when you look across all these disciplines, which you might find in any kinesiology textbook, like, do I have a plan? How am I dealing with altitude? How am I dealing with environment? And how am I aggregating these marginal gains? So let's say I'm a really good MMA fighter, and let's say I'm a 91%. So I am an A, but I'm a low A. How do I go from 91 to 96?
Gotcha.
So that's the way I look at it. And so good to great, so what might be the difference between Russell Wilson and Kirk Cousins? It'll be in the marginal areas. It'll be in sleep. It'll be in recovery. It'll be in film study. They'll both do the same things really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And, the physiological, I mean, aptitude does matter. I would never say it doesn't. I think the mind is probably 5 to 10%, truthfully, Eric. So,
Gotcha.
your physiology does matter, but it's not the deciding factor. I think there's a lot of athletes that are similar, I mean, there's Cam Newton and there's LeBron James. I mean, they look like GoBots or Transformers. You have John Jones and, obviously you have just like George Foreman, in boxing, or even Deontay Wilder, or whatever. I mean, even I just think in traditional boxing, like Pacquiao. I mean, because we spent a lot of time around his trainer, Russell, like how do you explain, him,
Right.
So, I mean, I know there's weight classes and all the elements, but I mean, some guys, it's a good athlete, obviously, but there's resilience, there's toughness, there's, these other factors that make a difference.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, you've got a book coming out in February called It Takes What It Takes. There's a foreword by Russell Wilson. I live in Coeur d'Alene. There's a lot of Seahawks fans out here. What's your book about? I'm excited for this to come out.
Yeah, a few years ago, Maria Shriver, President Kennedy's niece, had reached out to me and really challenged me. She said, I think you got a voice that is bigger than 150 athletes. I think you need to speak to 150 million people.
Yeah.
Like at that point, I was like, man, I don't know. And I didn't have social media. I didn't, because in the sports world, I never really needed any of that stuff. And I'd never really been consumer facing. So, but that really kind of opened my eyes, and I started thinking about it, and I started looking at the industry. And then Russell and I started talking, and Russell's brother, Harrison, and business partner, DJ, kind of started talking. And so I began this mission to sort of minimize what I was doing in sports and to go broader into the educational sector and into the business world, to affect more people. Russell Wilson and I partnered in a company, based out of Seattle called Limitless Minds.
Yeah.
And then really tried to create scale digitally. And in the book, I ended up getting a deal through HarperCollins. And really it's sort of kind of a 12-chapter exploration into a lot of unique lessons I've learned in and around the world of IMG, college football, pro football, special operations community, my own life, and really how we adapted the content to develop this idea around non-negativity and neutrality and behavior-based thinking versus the traditional elements of positive versus negative and mindfulness and meditation. And it really goes through the origins of that. I think it's a really simple book. It's probably size 50 font. Okay. And built for anybody, even those boys from Covington.
Sure, absolutely.
And so it's exciting. It comes out February 4th. Russ wrote a great foreword. I wrote it with Andy Staples. Andy Staples was Sports Illustrated's top college football writer, and now he writes for The Athletic. I think for those who follow personal development and sort of that industry, and it'll come in the business world. It's going to be a lot different than a traditional book, but it's built in sports. As much as I've spent time at Goldman Sachs and bigger companies, the truth is I come from the athletic world. I embrace that. I think sports is an EBITDA-based business as much as Johnson & Johnson is or anything else, and the best players are promoted, and if you can't sustain the standard, you're gone.
Right.
And so I think it's going to have a lot of relevance in a lot of different places.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask you one last question. I've spoken to over 100 MMA fighters. They're all in the up and coming fighters. Usually most of them are amateurs. And I know that the mental game is just as important as it is the physical game in fighting. But what kind of tips can you give these up and coming fighters to work on to make sure that they're successful, either just mentally or physically in their game?
I think in the time I've been able to just in, a little bit in UFC, spend time around Forrest and like Matt Hughes. And it was interesting before we played Notre Dame, we watched the Frank Trigg, Matt Hughes fight.
Yeah.
And really, that situation where, Hughes was pretty much choked out and just didn't go down. And our guys really resonated that in that Notre Dame game. I think so many people, Eric, kind of say, these are all the things you have to do. I think probably one of the biggest challenges I would say to up and coming or MMA fighters is, what are 5 things right now you could not do that would take you to another level?
Yeah.
5 things you could not say, could not eat, could not watch, could not consume. Where are you bringing negativity into your life that's completely within your control? How is your language? If your language was a marketing campaign, what are you selling yourself on?
Yeah.
But I think so many of us get this pressure to do certain things when I think the reality and the separating factor, what makes Russell Wilson better than maybe the next athlete, is what he's willing not to do and what he's willing not to eat and what he's willing not to drink. And I think so many guys are right on that edge. And if they just didn't do a few things, which we can always not do things, that might be that marginal gain that takes them to the next level. And I believe that success is doing simple better, that most successful athletes are driven through their simplicity, and your talent takes over in the complicated.
Yeah.
And look, with the ESPN deals and the other things, the industry of MMA and UFC, they're mainstream, phenomenal. The tough world, they're tough industry. Like football, they're based on physiology, and your body makes your money.
Yeah.
How are you taking care of your body? You don't need, to make $36 million a year. Before Russell was making any money, as a late round draft pick, he was finding ways to go to Massage Envy and instead of one massage, get 3 massages.
Right.
And, ice baths and doing all the different types of things. Am I doing simple better?
Right.
And I think that's the question. And then what could I not do right now that could instantly help me? Because most likely somebody who has what I don't have is willing to do something I'm not doing, or willing to not do something that maybe I'm not willing to not do right now.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, the challenge. And I love what you're doing. And I love the information and education, because education, when you apply it, is a force multiplier in your life.
Absolutely. Trevor, it's been an honor to talk to you, man. I appreciate you jumping on the call while you're in the car. And, man, I'm excited. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that.
Perfect. Well, you know what? Get to the Coeur d'Alene Resort and Hotel this weekend. That's one of my favorite spots. I love the 208 area code. I'm a big Sun Valley and even people don't know Schweitzer.
Yeah.
Big fan of both of them. So keep up what you're doing, and I'm sending my best to all of the up-and-coming stars in MMA. I know you got thousands of them subscribing to you, so I look forward to anything I can do. You can follow me at Trevor Moawad, TrevorMoawad, and then It Takes What It Takes on HarperCollins. You can pre-order right now. I know you already pre-ordered 10 copies, so I appreciate it. So you brought us up to 15 total.
Sweet.
So anyways, man, I'm excited. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you so much for hanging around. Really appreciate it. If you'd like to see more videos from Top Rated MMA and the Bearded Biz Show, please click the playlist and also hit subscribe to our channel. Become part of the Top Rated MMA and Bearded Biz community. We would really appreciate your support. Also, please leave a comment below. I will read and respond to all of them. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day.